Welcome here to the second Masterclass of the Alba Music Festival Composition Program. I am the director, Dr. Elliot Miles McKinley. It's my pleasure. Yeah, okay, I've got students in the back doing that. Thank you all. It's very lovely. Anyway, it's my pleasure to host a cadre of composers from all over the world who come here to work with a faculty of composers. And this year, our composer in residence is Aaron J. Kernis. And today, in our masterclass, we don't have any agenda other than we thought we would engage in a conversation and start out with some various topics. And then eventually we can move the floor to you for questions for Mr. Kernis and on any of the things that we may have touched or bring up new subjects. So thank you very much. This microphone is kind of weird because it changes volume and I'm trying not to blow out the speakers. So anyway, I'd like to welcome, first let's give an introduction to Aaron J. Kernis, our composer in residence.
Thank you.
So I met Aaron 2007.
When was that? That sounds about right.
That was 2007. Of course, I've known Aaron's music for many, many years before that, but I had the pleasure to meet Aaron in a composition institute hosted by the Minnesota Orchestra. And for a number of years, Aaron was the director of that program, and somewhere between 7 and 9 composers each year would come.
That's about right,
yeah.
Generally.
Yeah, for a week-long intensive institute where the composers would work with members of the orchestra. They will have written pieces, and the pieces would get recorded or performed, and we would all then gather for nightly sessions with Aaron and share our music and talk about all things composition. I do remember that as being a really intense and kind of amazing experience. I remember the lesson we had. It was so busy. We had a lesson the Saturday after the performances up there, and we had about an hour together. I remember that, and it's always a great pleasure to meet someone whose music you admire, and then get a chance to sit and talk and work with the composer. And so it's my pleasure that Aaron said yes to be the composer in residence when I asked him a few years ago for this year's program. So I think I'll probably start off by asking you, how are you?
Oh, am I? Well, I'm better rested than I was yesterday. And it's when you come to a program as enjoyable as this one, being part of things in the fog of jet lag is always a hard thing. So I'm glad to be truly present today.
Yeah, the jet lag is real. The experience is real. I think I'll probably ask this question, which and again, this is in no particular order, but since the last time I've met you, which is in 2007, so we've got a few years between times of meeting, how would you say, if at all, that your music has changed in your compositional voice?
It's probably changed about 4 times, I'd say. I'm only partially kidding. In general, I work within a kind of continuum between more tonal and less tonal. And different periods of time take one view and then transition to another. And I certainly, 2007, a lot of major things happened since then. One of them was my parents passing and after my parents passed, I wrote my largest work, my Third Symphony, a piece for large chorus and soloists and orchestra that was kind of the first, not just spiritual, but actually religious piece I'd written that was grappling with issues of belief and faith and existence. Unfortunately, you can't hear that online. There might be one movement, but it has not been professionally recorded. So that was a major thing. Right before I first met you, and I want to mention that 3 other composers are faculty members that were part of the Minnesota Institute. Carl Schimmel, Eric Stem, and J. Anthony Allen.
This is true.
It's been a little bit of mini reunion, which has been great. So let's see. In 2003, my twins were born, and that was, along with my parents passing, that was kind of a major generational, articulative moment. And my children's birth brought out a number of new pieces from me dedicated to them at that point and later on also. But really, in terms of stylistic change, I went through essentially, a couple of elections ago, I went through a period where the music turned quite dark for a long time, and has been edging back to more triadic things this year. But really, I'd say in general that continuum, which is always surprising, I never quite know how much atonality will show up in a work. But there were about 4 or 5 years where the work was highly atonal.
So, kind of connecting to that, and since we have a number of younger composers, or even I would say composers who are in the starting to intermediate part of their careers, when you were of similar time in your career, and now you have this ability to look back and see where you were and where you are now. What are some things that you've maybe noticed either consciously or unconsciously about your transition? So, I mean, I did mention when we just talked about 2007 to now, but sort of in the larger arc of your creative output from, say, the time that you were studying or just finished studying music to now, what are some of the I guess, inflection points, and what might you say to composers at an earlier stage about what it is to live a life in music to this point?
It's a lot of questions.
I realize that. We'll try to unpack them one by one.
Yeah. I think one of the things for me as a 20-something, especially early 20-year-old composer, was realizing what I didn't know, which was mostly everything, and to decide to go on a journey of self-study, of course with help of my teachers, but to try to work through issues with harmony, with form, with duration, with rhythm, that it just was something I knew I needed to make a very conscious series of attempts to solve, or one never solves them, but one works through these things. That's the beauty, as many of you know, the beauty about being a composer is there's never a point where you can say, oh, this is it. I've done it. It's always ongoing. In the early 20s, I began, because I felt that my music lacked form, I started to impose very strict formal structures on it because it lacked harmonic control I imposed a series of pitch restrictions and kind of harmonic goal restrictions, and tried to write, when I was given the chance, longer works, push from making longer works out of smaller songs. For example, I wrote a lot of vocal music at that time, but was really seeking to push out the forms into larger and larger kind of journeys. And after a period of a number of years, let's see, how many years would that really continued until I was in my early 30s, I think, when I began to drop that those intensely formal constructions and work a bit more intuitively with all that I gained from being strict for a few years.
Would you say that, okay, so there's a couple of things that you said that I'd like to touch on. One is the notion of placing restrictions on oneself as an artist, as a composer, where you do so to, like in your case, for example, to become more adept and fluent at, say, harmonic language, that, or formal, like form structures and so forth. Would you say that, and I know that some of my students have had, my particular students have had their struggles with things like counterpoint, species counterpoint, where you have a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions, but that is intentional. These lanes are intentional so that you can learn how to then do it more intuitively and more freely. Outside of having a teacher tell you that, hey, you should do this or do that and be prescriptive, did you find it difficult for yourself to be, for you to be self-disciplined in the process and stay disciplined as you were, say, because at that point, I'm assuming this was all self-directed.
It was pretty self-directed, yeah. Yeah, I knew how undisciplined I could be, so I knew especially that I had to impose these disciplines. And it was, of course, not, I don't think I ever thought this was going to be for the rest of my life, But I found the discipline quite bracing, and it helped me. I really had, I've used this word a lot today, a little sense of how to make structure flow, and forcing myself to adopt, strict mathematically based structures at that time. And these were tonal structures. These were not these were not 12-tone rules or things like that. These were structures that I created, or rules that I made up, not ones from like the discipline of counterpoint. And it was just a really good, it was a good experience, and it led to some interesting decisions that, and as I said, I felt like I really learned from that, and that kind of gave me a push off toward being freer a few years later.
One thing that I personally have experienced is to know if you also have experienced in this life of music that we are in as composers is for me, I've had a couple of points where I rather unintentionally, but it turned out to be intentional, taking some time off, like a little break, where there's maybe just one has finished a slew of pieces or a big piece or something, and then there's kind of like this time that feels like, I need a little, right? And for me, those have been very beneficial, and because it allowed me then to maybe think and focus on other things in music, always thinking about music, studying music, listening, that never stopped, but just not having to just put note or sketching and improvising, but not having to really be forced to finish anything. And for me, that was personally very helpful, and I think that when it first happened, I panicked, and I thought, like, am I going to write any more music? But now I know that when that happens, I don't panic. I just say that's a natural thing. Has that happened for you, and what are some of the things you might have learned from it if it did?
Well, the way I approach that has changed a lot in the last number of years. It used to be that, when I finished a piece, I would either go out for an ice cream or buy myself a shirt or something like that. That was always very important to celebrate, especially with a larger piece. But what I used to do at that time, and I thought that was for me was a mistake, was after each piece I would take a little time off. And I totally agree, though, that taking time when it feels really necessary, after a really particularly big work or a particularly big series of works, kind of time to reflect, time to decompress. But what I've discovered more recently is I like to keep my finger on the pulse of the music, whether it's a new piece or what I'm working on. And when I take time off, I don't know whether there's serotonin or which are the chemicals that are coursing, the adrenaline that's coursing through our system when we're in the middle of something, that starts to recede. And it only can take maybe 2 days before I lose the thread of something with the same intensity. So I find it helpful to, even for a very short time, to make sure that I'm looking at it, that I'm touching the piano every day, and that I don't lose that thread. Because in the larger times, I had the experience that is the larger breaks, that when I come back to it, it will then take me the equivalent amount of time. If I've taken 2 weeks off, it'll take me at least 2 weeks to get back in, and I'll be questioning myself the whole time, thinking I've forgotten how to compose. How did I ever know how to do this in the first place? And I've certainly had students come into me and kind of panicking about they feel like they've forgotten everything. So I would, in general, recommend a mixture of the two to really celebrate your the high points and the joys of finishing something and the relief, but also to keep touching the music as you're and that there are so many times where we're busy with personal responsibilities and teaching and other things, but just as I said, to touch that music every day and keep the ongoing physical connection, I think, is very vital.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think for me, I know that I never stopped touching the music, but I just, but it was still valuable to sort of step back,
Absolutely.
And kind of related to that, let's talk a little bit about the composer's workshop, as it were, and say routines and so forth, and how perhaps maybe your routines have changed over time, and what your kind of routine is now in terms of, approximately how many hours a day are you, say, quote, touching music in one fashion or another, actively composing and so forth?
Yeah, well, my kids just turned 21, and about 3 years ago they left the house, so that was an enormous change. And of course, before that, when they began to be more independent at about 15 or so, then I went past the time of driving them to everything and all that. So there have been a sequence of these changes where I could spend more and more time. And during some of those extremely fraught moments of fraught deadlines, luckily my ex would step in and kind of allow me to work those 18-hour days if I really needed to, and that was tremendously helpful. But for now, and actually I feel like I've become more disciplined as I'm getting older. I am spending time every day, and I can't say how much. It changes every day, really. But lately, if I'm in the middle of something and feeling good about it, I'm spending at least 6 hours, 4 to 6 hours working, and I luckily have the freedom now to do that. And a part of that time every morning is playing the piano before I begin. It feels like it wakes up my mind in a way that's tactile, and yeah, that's a very special part of the experience. And trying to leave off email and other phone distractions and all that to later on in the day, or when you're taking a break for lunch or whatever. I also do get up. I mean, this is what doctors tell me all the time anyway, but get up out of your chair frequently and move around. Don't allow the effort to become too sedentary.
Do you take walks when you're, like, if you're thinking about music? I know some composers do. I do sometimes.
Yeah,
as well.
pretty frequently. I mean, I can definitely say that, especially in years past, that again, when I'm trying to think through a problem, not only working it out on the keyboard, walks have been fundamental and totally crucial. And I've had a lot of the best inspirations, the best kind of visions of music while walking.
Would you say that your primary, of course your primary instrument is piano, or would you say that from a compositional point of view that you are a composer who works through the instrument as a tactile means to get to the music, or is it more imagination and then maybe sounding and then through, or some combination thereof?
It's a mixture, honestly. The piano is neutral to me now. It's something through which I hear other instruments. The other element is the voice. I try to keep the voice active. I'm, not a great singer by any stretch, but it's an important part of the of hearing the line of the music to be able to sing through it myself. Sorry, what was the other part?
Just about the relationship of composing and having the piano as being a vessel.
Yeah, and so it really goes back and forth. Sometimes I'll be walking around and will suddenly have an idea in my mind that then I translate into my fingers, and vice versa, where it's in my fingers and then it gets translated outward to colors of the orchestra. And I have this, I don't know if I'm certainly not the only one, but and it's not exactly synesthesia. And I've had moments of synesthesia where I've seen particularly music to celestis, which the orchestra is the Iowa Orchestra is doing tomorrow night. It's in A major, and for me that piece was always yellow, really bright, sunny yellow. And when I was writing it, I just had that image of the yellow A major. And there have been other cases like that, but it's not something that happens consistently by any stretch. There was another piece, Trio in Red, where I got to a particularly dark C sharp minor section, and that was like dark blood red. But that's very, very occasional. What happens much more frequently is somehow the translation of voice leading between chords as a kind of physical, I feel like it is a physical reality. And I envision some inner idea of what orchestral textures are. That's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, but the way that I tend to articulate this to composers as I'm thinking about it is that we are the vessels through which our music passes. And so I'm constantly singing everything I'm writing, whether consciously or not. I mean, I'm not really singing with great bravado, but it sounds like you do the same thing, and even when you're playing your instrument, piano, you're singing through the instrument.
Yes, totally.
Yeah, and that connection to yourself is, I think, vital to find that connection and in a sense, it finds really what it is that you want to say.
That's right.
Through the music.
And singing through it helps with the breathing of the phrases, really helps with everything, and not forgetting to breathe. That's vital as well.
It's part of
which is too
voice.
easy. I mean, I spent most of the time, and I still do, hunched over the piano, hunched over the computer, keeping my shoulders up, breathing, doing micro breaths. None of this is good. So to release the voice, to release the breath through the voice, can be really, really crucial.
Speaking of piano and stuff, I'm reminded of a time, and fortunately, in my experience, it was not the time, but there was a time, and if you were, was there ever a time when you were studying composition where you were discouraged from using the piano? Because I know that there was a period in our history where that was not a thing that was encouraged by some dark, dusty corners.
Yeah, there was definitely a belief for a while, and certainly strongly among certain particular teachers, that the piano was a crutch, and that one should really learn how to compose purely in one's mind. And there were a few little periods in my 20s where I tried to do that, but I just found myself more and more attracted to the kind of plasticity of sound and the suppleness that one could get playing through the sound, feeling the sound in that way, rather than as a purely kind of mental exercise. So there's a physicalization of the sound through whatever instrument we play or we use as our go-to, that I think is vital as well.
Yes, Stravinsky said that in a number of times. He said that he has to feel the vibration of the sound,
Right.
and he felt it through the instrument, through the piano.
Definitely.
He was working.
Yeah.
Let's talk, and then we'll get to perhaps some questions from the cohort here. You mentioned form. What are some of your thoughts about how you organize, and maybe I should phrase this as what's important to you in a piece of music, whether it's a piece of music that you're listening to, not of your own, but also of your own, like in terms of the flow of time and which is basically form. What are some important things that you consider that make a piece successful in terms of it? And duration isn't one of them, because a short piece or a long piece can be equally successful.
Yeah, I think to me most important is what's the journey of the piece? What's the piece telling us? I mean, I'm not saying it needs to be a story in particular, but between the color and the density and the way the piece travels, where's it taking us? And that connects directly to harmonic rhythm and intensity, and also harmonic guideposts. And I kind of look for those special moments when we've arrived somewhere that feels satisfying and sometimes thrilling, sometimes ecstatic, or put any adjective there. I think those are the most crucial, and that's what I seek to do most in my own music, is to create a sense of journey and either a resolution or some other kind of open-ended conclusion.
When you are considering the music in time, and you're considering those elements that are important. When you're constructing a piece and working with your material in the construction of the piece, like maybe taking a walk as part of that process, how do you step back enough to see, and perhaps to conceptualize even spaces of the music of the piece that aren't yet fully tangibly realized, that you can feel the proportions out? What are some of the things that you do as a composer in that art?
There's a little game that I suggest to students of mine where you put, I haven't done this for myself in a while, but where you put the score up on the wall around you so you can walk around it. And so you can see it disassociated from computer screen at kind of one page at a time. And for certain pieces and certain people, being able to move those pages around the room to say, what would happen if I put section C over here where section B is, or what about this different ending, can be a freeing experience, I think. Let's see, the question for me now, is I work so differently now than I used to. Another thing, and I was suggesting this to a student this morning, is almost making a catalog of the choices you've made already. That is, you take a look and do a little harmonic analysis of where you've been, where you're going so far, what harmonic areas might have been particularly important. Keeping track of that, creating either a graph or a picture or some kind of visual representation of like a flow chart, actually, of what you name the parameter about the flow of the piece. I suggested that this morning in terms of transitions. Look at all the transitions and make a catalog of those. See if there are too many, if they were too long, too short, whatever. You can really adopt that for anything.
Do you have a favored or favorite medium which you like to work? I mean, I know you write a lot of pieces for orchestra.
Sure. Orchestra and voice. And
either like alone or with orchestra, or with chorus.
Whatever.
Doesn't matter.
Choral music with text. And I wrote a great deal of that, as I mentioned, in my 20s and early 30s, and then went away for a long time with kind of a lot of regret, actually, going away for it, and I'm moving back into it again now. And as my interests in texts have changed, I kind of went away from poetry for a long time. It went alongside my writing mostly instrumental music. But again, I love that direct, visceral, quality that, I mean, also writing for the voice means writing for the cello, for the violin, for the flute, whatever. It's all vocal to me. It's all a manifestation of that. So, but orchestra, I of course, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of management, a lot of time management, and parts management, and all that. But I love the resource of all the colors and all the kind of departments of the orchestra.
Yeah, it's a wonderful instrument, but it is if anybody's ever copied parts, I used to copy parts by hand. We both used to copy parts by hand, so we know all of you have it much easier than we did when we grew up.
I mean, part of me, I wouldn't want to go back to that time actually, but I sort of miss the tactile sense of drawing a score yourself. And of course, some composers' work, it doesn't really successfully fit into the strictures that you have to impose to do it in notation programs, or certain notation programs, who still write their scores by hand and then have someone else put it in,
There's a couple of questions I want to ask, and then I think we can turn the questions over to the audience, but they're related to the orchestra. And Well, actually, they're related a little bit to what you talked about with writing things out by hand. And so part of the workshop, do you do like a full score or a sketch score before you go into notation software? Or, I mean, how much of that pencil on paper do you engage in currently? I mean, in the past, we used to do it completely from start to finish.
Yeah, I've done my first couple of pieces recently directly onto the computer, which is very strange. But I also find it's kind of like what I imagine painting on a if I view the computer as a canvas and painting directly into it, just so I don't get kind of sucked into the sense of permanence, which is easy to do by a notation program. But I'm finding I'm just as obsessively messing with the music on the computer as I would be in the page, but what the computer's allowing me to do is to capture stuff a little faster than I could on the page.
Yeah, which is true because it's a great tool,
right
for that. I just to say that about the pencil on paper aspect and Aaron sometimes missing the days of copying and so forth, is that one thing I do make composition students of mine do is copy out scores by hand. So even if it's not their own music, there's something valuable to be learned in the process of copying a piece out and singing. I have them sing the lines as they copy out the parts so that they develop that kind of connection. But that's an aside.
I recently, a guy called me who was an archivist, and I think he makes his living as an archivist, and he basically said the only scores that are worthwhile and not worthwhile, but worth any money, that is, would be ones that were hand copied, and that the runoff copies from the computer are basically just pieces of paper. So he was encouraging me to recopy things so my kids could have some, could sell off these scores.
How's that project going?
I'll let my kids recopy the music. How about that?
Good answer. I think the last thing I'm going to ask about orchestra is how, and I don't want this to make to make a dark turn, but I want to ask about over the last, say, 20, 30 years, the nature of orchestra as an entity in the United States has been changing, and I'm curious about how your relationship to, quote, the orchestra, and I mean the whole sort of business aspect, but also the systems aspect, has changed. And do you find that working with orchestras is more challenging in some ways, or has that actually not really been the case for you?
Well, I definitely found that when I was working with orchestras as a staff member with the Minnesota Orchestra and for a while with the Nashville Symphony, those were the periods when I felt closest to the actual, to it as the entity of the orchestra in multiple ways, as getting to know the players directly, the staff members, the audience from week to week. That's, if you have a chance to have an orchestral residency at some point, I really highly recommend that, because it brings it to a whole new personal level. I mean, that's true of a chamber ensemble as well, but there's something special about working in a larger institution. And because I'm no longer doing that, I feel a little bit more distant from it now. That is not from the music, but from the day-to-day aspect and actually the educational aspect too that we experienced together. But there, of course, another thing about a life as a composer is that there are many different periods that one goes through. Nothing ever, nor should it, nothing ever stays the same. It's always about change and variety and our ability to adapt.
Great. Well, I could keep asking questions, but I think it might be interesting to turn over the microphone, as it were, and I can hand this to, I think I'm going to deputize Luke as the mic holder and deliverer. To anyone who would like to ask a question, Mr. Kernis, and it could be about anything, or it could be something new, something we've talked about. The floor is yours, and hopefully that'll spur even more discussion. So.
Thank you. I guess my question is, what does your pre-compositional process look like? How much working with material before actually starting a piece is there for you? Stuff like that.
So the question is about my pre-compositional process. And the difference between what it was when I was 20-something and what it is now is about as far away as it could be. Back then, as I said, I was drawing maps, I was making charts, I was figuring out kind of structural plans. And now I'm starting from curiosity and the thrill of the hunt, the thrill of the journey. And actually, it took me quite a while to do this, but trying to embrace not knowing. Because I found myself always being terrified of not knowing. And that would then stop me from learning. That would stop me from making progress. So I had to often work through that to get to stage one, where I could actually let ideas start to be developed. So, but now I'm trying to start taking a deep breath, plunging in and seeing what I find, rather than finding stuff before I start composing.
Thank you.
Who else? We have three hands raised. They all went up at the same time. So Luke, you get to choose.
It's the closest, yeah.
I just wanted to ask, how often do you get to work with the groups that perform your music? Like, do you ever have to reach out to them to work with them, or do you ever get people approaching you to ask if you can like work with them, workshop?
Let's see. There are cases, say, when I want to make a recording of something, where I'll reach out to a particular group and want to work with them. Generally, if it's a new piece, that's kind of built in to, if I have a commission from a group, we'll arrange everything around the date of the premiere, and I'll go work with them wherever they are. But in the case of older works, like recently, Music Celestis was done with the Chicago Symphony, and of course an orchestra of that quality. I had to go out there, and my girlfriend's from Chicago also, so that was a very special experience for me to go out. And I didn't work with them. I couldn't get out in time for rehearsal, but they played it brilliantly, and it was lovely to be part of that. So it really varies on the for the work. For a long time, when I was raising my kids, I rarely, if ever, went to any performances of older works. But these days I'm flying around a little bit more and enjoying that freedom.
I'm finding that I'm getting stuck formally at times in these old molds of sonata, or the theme and variation, that sort of thing. And you said that was something that you really particularly grappled with. How did you manage the I guess, the risk of trying out forms you weren't sure were going to work? How did you navigate the fact that if it went wrong, it would go wrong at scale?
I guess even when I was doubtful, there must have been some inner trust, or at least the curiosity to see how it all worked out. There's no guarantee ever that anything is going to succeed or fail. It's just we're taking a risk always, but hopefully it's a risk we feel we can sustain or manage or cope with. I remember when I first started using major scales in the midst of 1980s New York City, heavily academic modernist New York City, and how much of a risk that felt at that time. That's maybe lost a little bit of its scariness. And it felt similarly the first time I used a sonata form or traditional forms in my first string quartet. That felt like a risk that I was terrified actually about because of its connection to the past. Not only looking at it in context of what composers in the past had done, but also of being judged, of being judged as doing something insufficiently modern. So I hope that answers at least part of your question.
Thank you. As composers, we're asked to do a lot of score study of other composers, and I was wondering what composers you were able to learn a lot from. What did you learn? And I'm curious if you still do like score study, like pull out other people's scores, and how did they do that? How did they solve that problem? That kind of thing.
Well, certainly the first composer, my go-to composer is Bach, every single day, pretty much. Always playing the piano music, listening to the cantatas, that kind of thing. And recently I found myself going back to the great fourth, BWV 4, I forget what's the name of the one where every movement is based on the same chorale. Of the early works, it's amazing. I felt like I learned a lot from Sibelius, actually not the program, but the composer, about transformation of material from one form, from one character to another vastly changed character, and also the kind of metamorphosis over time from one kind of time feeling to another. Let's see. There's so many. I mean, so from Messiaen, the color resource, the combination of chords, the way to use clusters. I could just go on and on with with that, and generally. It's listening to live music that will pull me back to the shelf and have me look at some particularly cool stuff that I want to see how it was done. And with the frequent availability of new pieces online now, that is quicker than I expected. I think people must be going in and pirating, or what's the term there? They're sneaking in and making recordings secretly. There was a recent, of the newest Tom Addis orchestra piece that I was able to hear online a few weeks before its American premiere. And the recording sounded perfect, like it could have been studio recording, but I bet it was a sneaked in recording. So yeah, it's a yes to every part of your question.
Hello. My question is, let's say like 100 years from now, when students look back at your music first study or when people are listening to your recordings, what's something that you hope that they remember or something that you feel like you'll be known for?
I hope, first of all, hope the world exists in 100 years. And, and then, of course, adding to that, we hope that music still exists 100 years from now and that there will still be an earth, a planet for us to inhabit and enjoy. That is a really incredibly tough question. Well, certainly I hope they'll find the music, that it won't just disappear into obscurity and decomposition. I'm speechless, so. Yeah. Okay. Thank you then.
Hopefully this one is an easier question for you. But I would ask, as just some advice to a young composer in terms of building your network. What are the important things to do in the early stages, even before you're writing your magnum opus? How to sort of start that journey so that when you're in the midst of your intermediate composing career, that's something you haven't just thought of, if that makes sense.
Write for your friends. Work with your friends. Work with people that you admire. Don't be shy to go up to people who you admire and say you'd love to work together. It may work in some cases and not in others. But I think to have the realization that the world around you is the core of your network. And whether it's your school, your immediate, conductors who are on the faculty, really most of the relationships for the future come from one's earlier years, just to a great extent. So that's the kind of primary thing I'd say.
So 100%. So everything that I'm doing here in Alba is the result of friendships that I've developed over 30 years, solely, for example. Stephanie was a classmate of mine, and I know that the composers, the composition crew heard this story yesterday, but for the sake of everybody else, Soli, the founder of Soli, Stephanie Key, who's actually not playing this week because she's playing with the Dallas Symphony. They're going on tour. But it was because I drank copious amounts of coffee with Stephanie in a dungeon of the New England Conservatory, and then Stephanie was like, I'm a clarinetist, I'm a composer. And I said, okay, I'll write you some music. And that developed a friendship. And then, one foot in front of the other, and eventually, I got invited to write a piece for at then, 30 years ago, Newfound Ensemble, and so on and so forth. And it really, so I want to lean into what Aaron said about write music for your friends. But I want to lean into the friend part more, because they're human beings first, and they happen to be really good at playing their instruments or composing or whatever the case may be. And I mean this genuinely, that most of my performer friends are friends first, and if they never ever played another note of my music, it would not at all stop me from being their friends or hanging out with them or, wishing them Happy New Year or whatever the case may be. So this is just general advice for everybody in the room, musicians, composers, whatever, is be a good person first. And everything else will eventually find its way to you through that process. Don't worry about it too much. I don't know if that helps.
Absolutely right.
Thank gentleman here. My question is, I realize it's somewhat subjective and personal, but in terms of very interested in the process of how essentially all of us use like extra musical ideas to generate art. You said earlier, and I really connect with that, how you had some events in your early life, or years ago, and you would write pieces around it. Can you speak to that, like in the terms of like as part of the creative process?
Sure. And this is another thing I was mentioning to a student this morning, well, first of all, for me, I'm sure for many, if not most of us, that things that are external create inner emotions. And if I'm inspired by a work of art or a novel or a poem or whatever, that I try to follow that train of emotions. Sometimes specifically tied to that work, but other times just as a channel, find the way that external work allows you to channel your emotions towards something. I recently did a piece, an interesting project that took me many months to figure out, where I was asked to dedicate a new work to a very famous philanthropist. And I spent time getting to know his life and getting to know his art collections. And out of that, I chose a few works of, out of that, I chose a spirit of his life, a sense of what he's like, which was very, it was very much on the surface, but it was just a sense. Didn't have to be that many elements. And then I chose a few works of art, and from those, chose an element in each work. Now, I wasn't trying to make some sort of replication between the work and some sort of picture in music, but I chose a photograph that was highly sensual, and so I focused on the sensuality of that. I chose another one that featured the violin. It was highly structural, and rather than, as I said, trying to be comprehensive. So those are a couple ways. Back in the 90s, I did 5 years of pieces that were related to the war in Bosnia at that time and to the Holocaust. And I read a great deal, and I created kind of conceptual structures that allowed me to channel my emotions to build rather large, imposing structures. And in that case, because the emotional content of those works was so difficult and so fraught, the creation of an external structure allowed me to, can I say, slightly intellectualize it so it could exist as a separate object of music rather than just as kind of a work that's confessional kind of sort of work. So there's just a few senses of how I've dealt with, but of course there are many others, and each composer I'm sure has a different way in. So thank you for the question, and thank everyone for their questions as well.
I'm in my undergrad for music education right now, and as a future educator in the States, I'm curious as to how I can best help my students who are curious to grow their composing chops, and how I can best prepare myself to set my students up that are just in my band room that want to get into composition and whatnot.
And specifically to get into composition?
Yeah, and just exploring that side of of music?
Well, I mean, certainly the amount and the styles and the quality of music that's available for everyone to be inspired by is enormous and so varied, and there is less and less of a feeling of, you know, of this is good, this is bad, that kind of thing, of that element. I'm constantly encouraging students to follow their heart about what interests them and what speaks to them, and not adopt that doesn't, not adopt a kind of artificiality to their choices or their inspirations. So that, I mean, that may seem like a facile answer, but I truly feel that it's kind of a core aspect of the compositional journey. Now, on the other hand, finding jobs is not a core part of, not an easy thing in that, but that is secondary to the development of creativity and of finding joy and finding inspiration from wherever you find it.
I imagine that in your time as a composer, you've been able to work with groups that have played your music not at the level that you had hoped. And
How true.
sorry.
Yeah, exactly, we've all been there.
I wonder what, so in those moments, maybe you kind of go through a battle of wondering whether it's your fault or theirs. I wonder what it took for you to maybe get over the hurdle of not, or just allowing yourself to trust the process, and what makes that whole process easier.
No, it's all their fault. It's not, the answer isn't bourbon. Well, certainly there's the hope that there'll be another chance. It doesn't always happen in every case. But there's a great deal to learn from. It's in a way a lot easier to have a really wonderful performance that's really at the top level, because you could sit back and say, oh, I knocked that one out of the park, didn't I? And a little bit more humbling to learn from the struggles of some of our performers, maybe, and figure out what worked. Try to actually separate what worked well from what didn't work quite as well. It gives a more realistic view of that. And to have a kind of patience with performers, and a kind of humbleness as well. So one's ego is always tarnishable and a little fallible. Yeah.
I guess I have a couple of things I could ask. Everyone might be more interested in this one. I asked this of anyone who's been doing this a while, successfully or otherwise. Obviously, you've been somewhat successful. Is there anything you've written that's either gained popularity or just has survived throughout the years that you really just wish would go away?
Since I only have a handful of pieces, like a small handful of pieces that that are repeated a good deal, There are a couple of pieces. It's not done so much now, but I have a piece called New Era Dance. And it was very much of its time, both it had a kind of political undertone to it, written in the beginning of the 1990s. And it was done fairly frequently with orchestras, and it would feel, these days, it would feel a little uncomfortable for me because certain moments of, how can I say, it's certain almost kind of political moments or hyperactive moments seem a little, just a tiny touch embarrassing to me right now. But in general, other pieces, I mean, I'm kind of, well, no, I won't say that. I think in general, the handful of pieces is, I'm okay with that and hope there are more in the future.
This is just a rather basic question, but was there a moment in your life where you realized, yes, I want to be a composer? And if so, like, why did you choose to become a composer? It's not an easy career, and so was there something about it that you're just like, I have to do this?
When I started seriously thinking about being a composer, I'm really glad that I didn't know that much. In other words, about how hard it would actually be, and that. And as I grew with it and learned more, the fact that I felt like I was growing with it enabled me to withstand a lot of the challenges and take them in stride. But when I was 15, I had my first work read with a chamber ensemble in Philadelphia, and I met my first composition teacher, Theodore Antoniou. And started studying with him not long after. And somewhere in there, and in the next few years, when I had composition lessons with different people around Philadelphia, it was clear I was enjoying the process. It was clear I was really engaged. And by the end of high school, when I was making college applications, it was clear I wanted to go to conservatory, and I wanted to focus exclusively on composing. So, you know, by that point, it was very clear, much to the horror of my parents. But they eventually came around. So thank you for that. I do want to mention something that I was asked this morning. I was asked how I start, and I want to just convey how important I find improvisation to be. And for me also, visualizing is extremely important. And I'm visualizing sound and textures and combinations of instruments. And they're not necessarily formed sounds, they're not necessarily tunes or ideas, but just kind of very abstract elements that gradually become a little clearer. But I just want to really stress the importance of improvisation and on whatever instrument you feel most comfortable, and singing as well, as we said earlier.
I'm going to reinforce that. You can hold on to that. Maybe there's more questions that might come our way. I want to reinforce that because actually that to me is also something that, like the improvisation aspect. I mean, it's basically composing in real time. And I'm often surprised at how many composers, people who identify as composers, don't engage in that sort of real-time joy of improvisation. And improvisation, it doesn't mean that you're going to sit down and play a jazz standard. You know, I can because I know how to read chord charts, but you know, it doesn't have to be that. Like to Aaron's point, it can be anything. One of the best places to go and improvise is the kitchenware section of IKEA. That's a great place to improvise. All those glasses and things to make cool sounds. You can just go crazy down there. I usually do after I've had a plate of meatballs.
But with the IKEA staff there,
Much to their annoyance. I want to also loop into the question about, I think was the question, how do you know if you're a composer? I forgot exactly the question, but it was like, when was the point that you decided? And kind of to reinforce a little bit, Aaron's trajectory is different than mine, but usually when I want to kind of amplify the point that, and I think you would agree with this. I didn't choose music. Music chose me. I mean, I resisted it for a while, actually. I tried to do other things, but it kept coming back to me, and I realized at some point that I couldn't avoid it. And I can't go a day. If I don't do music on some level, after more than a day, I go and get antsy. I can't handle it. I don't know if you have the same experience, but it feels like it is no, you're gonna do this. And if you have that feeling, so this is for anybody in the room, not just the composers, but for any musicians in the room, if you feel that music is choosing you, and you'll know, then you're probably on the right path. The question about the practicalities of it, in terms of, making money or all that stuff, that's another issue. It's a big issue, it's another issue. But one option that many people do is make money with more sensible job paths. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a musician. It doesn't mean that you're not a composer. And I know many people who have much more sensible jobs in terms of like putting food on the table and so forth, and are living very comfortably, but are very good composers and are writing every day. I don't know if you want to add to that or not, but yeah. Do we have any other questions? Oh.
I've got a follow-up. I can speak on it. Thanks for asking the improvisation detail. For me, at least in my process, I feel like improvisation versus composing kind of exists like on a continuum almost. How much of your composition process incorporates improvisation? Like where, then I ask, what's the dividing line? Yeah. I mean, like, say you have an image in your mind about, like you said earlier, I've got these sort of vague MIDI chords or a color. How much do you go back to, like, maybe the instrument, the piano, or other things? Like, where are you playing in that realm?
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. And this combination between playing and listening and then visualizing, sometimes with images and sometimes with these abstract ones. It really whatever works, and it all kind of, I couldn't pinpoint some dividing line between one aspect and the other. Yeah.
Any other questions for Aaron?
So there was a question about networking, and
What, sir?
about networking.
Yeah.
And I had a related question. It doesn't have to be about networking in particular, but I thought it might be interesting for us to hear from you an example or two of how, in a career in music, one thing leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another. If you could give us any examples of that in your career or in your life, whether it has to do with networking or not, I don't know, but.
Yeah, no, that's also true that what we said about friendship also extends to the 6 degrees of separation. because people, through the work we do with performers we know, other performers hear things, audiences hear things. That's really the way. Our world is so small, and it's through our friends that it grows, large in all ways. I'm trying to think of some specific examples, and I'd have to go back kind of far, because now a lot of the connections between the propagation of works is kind of hidden from me. Let's see. I mean, certainly this is not exactly the same kind of thing, but at one point I was understandably very inspired by Renee Fleming's singing, and I happened to be in Dallas, and she was singing with the symphony, and I found my way to backstage to just offer my admiration and to say how much I hoped that we would work together, or I would write for her at some point. And about 5 years later, that happened through the Minnesota Orchestra, and that with a couple other singers like Dawn Upshaw and a couple other performers that I struck up a conversation because I was so. I mean, it was hard because I was so shy and so dazzled by their talent, but I still screwed up my courage, and when it's not something I did every day, I wasn't, being a Carnegie Hall, backstage kind of person searching for conductors to glad hand, but certainly there were special moments where a word led to kind of looking into my work and led to something in the future. Those are the most concrete examples I can give, rather than different from conductors, because for me they've either heard from themselves or there's been kind of word of mouth that very much happened with Musica Celestis at the beginning, where people would just hear from one, and then there seemed to be a chain that occurred. But most of it was just out of my view, actually.
Do we have any other questions?
As I say again, I really appreciate all of your questions and your insight this afternoon, and there'll be 3 of my works performed here at the festival. The first tonight, which is Le Quattro Stagioni della Cucina Futurismo, the 4 Seasons of Futurist Cuisine, which Paulino will be narrating and Soli will be playing. And being that I'm not sure there is stuff in the program, or as if any of the background is in the program, or will I be saying that to people? Yeah. So as it's a quasi-Italian piece as well. But it's based on texts by the creator of Futurism, his manifesto in 1909, I believe. And that's the first movement of the piece. And then the other 4 are 4 recipes from the Futurist cookbook from the 1930s. It's very silly. And Soli plays it wonderfully. And then there'll be a performance tomorrow night of Musica Celestis, and a few more. Thursday night, is it Saturday night, wow. Saturday night, a new version of the Elegy for Those We Lost, which was written during the pandemic. And this version is for trumpet and strings, and will be a premiere. So I hope you can come hear these pieces, and what I'm sure will be all wonderful and beautiful performances.
So, do we have anything else for Mr. Kernis while we are on point? Oh, we do. Excellent.
I'm sorry, one more question. You had mentioned previously that some of your pieces were partly inspired by political activities. Would you, in your experience, say that when you write your music, it has an impact on the things going on, or is it mostly just a way to remember things or inspire people?
I think I could say that I have had no impact on any, but hopefully some impact on the listeners and on the performers. Hopefully. Thank you.
I overheard that you like movies, you like film.
Food.
Food? Film and food, right. So does your passion for film have a deep connection to the music or vice versa? And what sort of films do you enjoy the most?
People have told me that they find at least some of my work cinematic. I don't set out to do that specifically, but certainly I have enjoyed a lot of the kind of big film scores that, you know, even things like such as Dunkirk or things way in the past. But it hasn't had a direct impact. Sometimes I've thought of trying to throw my hat in the ring, but for some film work, but that hasn't happened. I haven't taken it that seriously. And your second part of your question?
What films do you enjoy the most?
Oh, what films? Yeah. So the film I can't wait to see is Furiosa. That's what I'm really, you know, because the last Fury Road was a masterpiece, and I particularly enjoy the occasional diet of sci-fi films, but I belong to a really great art film channel called Mubi, where I get to see a lot of lesser known young filmmakers, a mixture of young and old filmmakers. I like a lot of Lars von Trier's films, and my interests sort of run the gamut between older directors and avant-garde directors and more press commercial Hollywood films. Thank you for asking that too.
Anyone else? Well, thank you all very much. First of all, I'd like to give thanks to Aaron for sitting with us for the last hour and a half and talking music and answering your questions. So Aaron, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Like Aaron said, tonight there's a concert right here, 9 o'clock. Solely Chamber Ensemble will be presenting Aaron's music and others, and also Alba Music Festival Composition Program alum Daniel DeToni, a commissioned piece. So that'll also be a world premiere, and music by Carl Schimmel and myself, and so should be a lot of fun. And well, thank you all very much. It's gelato time.